Good evening. My name's Nigel. But why am I really here tonight? Well, have you heard of organisations like the National Front, the British Movement and Combat 18? As has been said, I have, because I was a member of all of them. I used to be a neo-Nazi. Now I understand, coming to a place like this, that people may struggle with that. But what I'm asking is for you to stay with me and just let me sort of take you on a journey. Because what I want to do is basically show you that using labels doesn't reduce extremism, it actually increases extremism. So how did I get involved? Well, I got involved not because of racism. I actually got involved because of my hatred of the IRA and terrorism in general. In the 1980s, all you saw on the television was people getting blown up by the IRA, people getting murdered, people getting maimed. When I was at school, somebody handed me a leaflet outside of my school gates. And on that leaflet, it told you a story. It was a story of a young mum. And that young mum never returned back to her family because she walked into an IRA bomb. Reading that leaflet changed my life because it opened the door to extremism. But that was just the start. When the far right open their arms and they embrace you, they learn about who you are and what's important to you, and they learn about your family. They learned that my mum was dying of cancer, and that was the door that they needed to open up to come into my life. And it was easy. They started by doing simple things like getting the shopping. It then moved on to these organisations taking my mum to chemo. They even taught me to make a Sunday lunch. And if anybody knows anything about me, that's a bloody miracle. But they were the support that I needed at that time. I thought they cared. I thought they were good people. But they weren't. They come in and they will manipulate what they think and what they feel. And they'll show you a path. That path for me was opened up because they talked about things about, well, if we were in power, your mum wouldn't want, any drugs, because we'd be able to give her the drugs that she needed. It's really, really important to understand that they listen to you. When they move on and go on from this, it's just the start. When you're involved, how bad does it get? Well, if I'm honest, it gets really bad. Violence doesn't just happen on demonstrations. Demonstrations often turn very violent because people are passionate on both sides about their beliefs. But the violence doesn't just stop at demonstrations. It follows you home. It can be simple things. It could be something like a brick through the window. It could be graffiti outside your house. That moves on to threats of violence. Those threats of violence turn into violence. But it's just not violence against yourself. It can escalate to family members. The hardest, sort of most extreme example I could give you was at the time the far left threatened to rape my mum when she was dying of cancer because of my beliefs. Now that doesn't make you less extreme, that just makes you more extreme. because that hate builds and you want to do something about it. But what happens when you actually think, do you know what? A penny drops, something is not quite right about this. The far right promise a lot, but they give very little. When that penny drops, what is it? The first chink in my armour, if I'm honest, was the fact that I was married at the time and my wife gave me an ultimatum. Combat 18 or her. And I chose Combat 18 because what was happening is I was groomed that much to believe that the movement is above all. And that didn't just happen then, it's happening today. Because the far right don't put families first, they destroy families. Turning wife against husband, turning parents against children, and turning their children against the parents. All because if you don't stand for the movement, then you're expendable. You can go. This is what the far right do, and we've got to try and counter this. But what I also want to talk about is the extreme violence that comes with it. People involved in extremism often have flashbacks. These flashbacks can happen at any time, really. It could be a street you're walking into, it could be late at night, it can be even when you're asleep. What'll happen is you'll wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and you'll think you're still back on the front line. But you'll wake up and you'll realise actually it's just another night where you've got to try and get back to sleep and try and get some rest for the next day. When you decide that you're going to leave, what do? Well, it's really, really hard. Because first of all, you've got to decide, can you stay where you live? If you stay where you live, will it be safe? If you decide to move, where will you go? Will it be a different city? Will it be a different town? And how much money do you need to go and do this? It all takes meticulous planning. Now, when I did this, there was nobody there to help, nobody at all. And I had to just decide, okay, where do I go and move? Do you know what? I'm going to go and live in Newham because it's great. When I decided to come there, I was basically stayed for 2 years to get my head together. Thankfully now, there is formers across the world, all there willing to help others leave the far right and show that actually there is a path so that you can leave safely away from extremism. But we have to understand that actually society must forgive and accept people can change. I've got a picture here of a really good friend of mine called Shahid. Now Shahid is a former foreign fighter, an Islamist extremist to most, but would anybody think that a former far-right organiser and a former Islamist foreign fighter would sit together? We sit together because we understand that actually extremism is never the answer. Dialogue is, and that's what we've got to understand. So how do we stop this? Because we can't just keep going around in circles. You know, we can't wait 10 years, 5 years, 20 years. We've got to do something about this. We've got to build real community. And I want you to think about the word community. Within it, there's a word called unity. The only way we're going to get anywhere is based by all communities working together. And that's really, really important. Because strong communities are very difficult for extremists to work in. What we've also got to do is basically make sure that you need to be able to forgive people's behaviour. If people have been involved in extremism, okay, we need to forgive the behaviour. I'm not saying that to get sympathy for the individual, but what we need to do is we need to forgive the behaviour so people can come back into society. We need to also basically think about individuals, okay, they are not our enemies, okay, they're not labels. What they are is individuals with needs, and we need to look at those needs and we need to help people do that. People often say to me, once a Nazi, always a Nazi. Tonight, I actually hope that what I've managed to do is show you that actually people can change. Now, I believe actually that we can't change the world, if I'm honest. But what I do think is we can change where we live, important local things. It could be something like the local youth centre, threatened with closure. It could be the local library. These places are really important community assets that we need to keep open. It could be something like the local pub, because for many, that local pub is their community centre. It's where they go and meet their friends, their family. It's where they talk about things that matter to them. Because if that pub closes down, what will happen then is isolation will set in. And isolation is the best friend of extremism. So let me leave you with something. Can society accept change? I hope so. Thank you and have a good evening.